My presentation is called Reality Is. And if this is up and running, and if you can see my screen, then you should be seeing a picture of a very chaotic, very confusing, very wonderful scene that's just around the corner from my house. And I was driving around to get some pictures for the presentation this morning, actually driving around to get pictures the other day for the presentation this morning, and I found this, and this really encapsulates everything I want to talk about today. So hopefully you're hearing me and you're seeing me, and I'm just gonna look, and I should probably get the chat up and running too at the same time, just to make sure that everybody, I'll take a quick look at chat to make sure. Okay, good. So if someone wants to just give me a thumbs up or something in chat, let me know that I'm coming through and the presentation is visible on the screen.
Everything looks good, Bernard.
Then I thank you so much. It's always good to get feedback when you're talking into the void. I will begin the presentation. And I will begin the presentation by saying, once again, thank you, and especially thank you to Paul. And I think the order of the presentations this morning were somewhat random, but it worked out really well. And I love that I'm following Paul's presentation for a couple reasons. First off, thank you so much for the shout out, but I also really like the fact that I'm following an operations presentation, both because I'm interested in operations, but also because the point of operations is that it adds a dimension to your model railroad layout. And by that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with building a layout and doing the art and the scenery and all the other things. But I think that operations is sort of an evolution and adds more to the layout. And I think what I want to talk a little bit about today is that same type of concept, adding that extra dimension to the layout through really taking a look at pictures like the one that's on the screen, analyzing it, and adding some of these scenic elements to your layout. So today, I'm really going to talk about, let me just cue this up. There we go. 3 things. I'll give you a little sort of few minutes on my background and what I'm doing with MiniPrints. I think most people are familiar with that. I see quite a few customers and friends and acquaintances in the group. I'll then move on to the really the main attraction, where I go through 3 locations that are just within walking distance of my house and office, and do a little sort of deep dive on those 3 locations, and then really conclude with, why bother? Why really look at, these things, and why go to the lengths of super detailing a scene? What do you, as a modeler, get out of super detailing a scene, and what does the viewer take away? So as mentioned, I am an accidental model railroad manufacturer. I have started a company 2 years ago called MiniPrints, and we make mini things. The smaller, the better, the more detailed, the better, the stranger and odder, the more fun it is for me. I am a recovering graphic designer by trade, and fell into this business really by accident. And this is me, believe it or not, it's 8 years ago now. And at the time, I was working for a Canadian paper company called Cascades. And because of my graphic design background, I was repping their papers to other graphic designers in the Toronto area, and happily got to spend quite a bit of time up in the mill north of Montreal, where the mill was actually serviced by the Quebec-Gatineau, which is a Genesee and Wyoming short line. So this is me, I think around 2014 in Quebec City, looking very happy beside my absolute favorite engine in the world. I love SW switchers. I think this is an SW 1500, ironically named 1500 on it. And yeah, nothing beats a switcher in my mind. So I'm happy. I'm discovered this this wonderful short line, and that led to a medium-sized basement layout, which takes up most of my basement. The main part being this room that's around 30 feet by 10 feet, where I model the Quebec-Gatineau from Montreal to Quebec City. It's prototypical with an asterisk. Most of the industries exist, not necessarily in the exact location. So I guess we could call it proto-freelance. But the focus of my layout really is the area, the port of Trois-Rivières. So I'm going along and building this layout, and all of a sudden I run into a problem. And here's the layout in a state, I guess, a couple years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, and I'm building it, and you can see sort of the gist of what I'm doing. There's an underneath part where there's hidden staging. And if you notice the portion up in the upper left-hand side of the picture here, I was building this little water feature, and I wanted to put together a beaver lodge. And I was looking for an HO scale beaver, and believe it or not, it didn't exist. So that was surprising to me. It's on, the National Animal of Canada. It's on, the Canadian Pacific Herald on the boxcar there, and no one made one. So I decided that I would put some of my design skills to the test, and I came up with a 3D printed beaver. And actually, you mentioned Steve Dranix. I think Steve Dranix was the first person I sent one to. And I sent some out to other friends who thought they were kind of neat, and then posted about it on Facebook. And people started asking to buy them. And that's how, this crazy MiniPrints was born. It all started, by this little 3D printed beaver, which happily allowed me to finish the scene. I got a beaver on top of my beaver lodge, and I even added a satellite dish because, what is a beaver lodge without a satellite dish? It's completely prototypical. There truly is, as you'll see in a few slides, a prototype for everything. So fast forward 2 years, and the business has grown. I continue to add animals, and now I've added people and objects. And in January, I moved to a commercial space in the Junction Triangle neighborhood of Toronto. And I'm mentioning this because a couple of the locations that we're going to go take a look at in a minute are located in this area. It's an industrial area of Toronto. I'll show you the building I'm in a minute. And it's allowed me to expand the business. And certainly if anybody is in the Toronto area or is visiting the Toronto area, I'd love to host you, and we can go rail fanning. If you're not familiar with the Junction Triangle, it's kind of fun because not only is my space located across from a brewery, which was part of the reason I wanted to be there, it's also hemmed in on 3 sides by trains. So to the east of me, I have a GO Transit line, which every Sunday morning at around 9:55, the Canadian heads up. So I have a live rail cam, and you can watch the Canadian go past, right past the back of my shop. That's my questions about the Canadian in the first VIA presentation. To the west is the main GO via Union Express Pearson link. And to the north is the CP main line, all culminating in that area to the upper left called the junction, where everything sort of meets. Very interesting historic area, and a lot of fun to be in a building and run a railroad business out of a railroad area. And this is the building. And there's a reason I'm showing you this building. The building you can see in this photograph that is dated 1913 was rail served. You can see right in front there of the building, the Telfer Biscuit building, just behind the Bauden Machine Company building, which is the building that I'm in. There is a Grand Trunk boxcar there. Right, it's hard to see, but you can see a boxcar parked on the street there. And behind that boxcar, interestingly, is the Cowan Chocolate Factory, which is still in operation today under the name of Nestle. So really good rail-served industry area. in the past. And this is the building I'm in, 163 Sterling Road, formerly Bowden Machine Company. And I walked around to the back of it. And this is where my story really starts. This is where, you know, the reality is story begins. Because I started to look at the back of this building, and I looked at the back of this building with perhaps a bit of an eye towards, you know, could I model it? You know, could I create a Fremo module, you know, in my space of my space? You know, I thought that would be kind of fun. And certainly this is a pretty easy building. I mean, this looks a lot like, you know, every sort of plastic kit ever built, you know, whether it's a DPM or a, you know, Middlesex Manufacturing. I mean, there are lots of brick panels, you know, lots of buildings that look like this. But then, you know, it's interesting because I started staring at it. And I think that, you know, this is a line that that I've always sort of remembered. I'm, you know, a Sherlock Holmes fan. You know, and as Sherlock Holmes acutely stated, people see, but they do not observe. And I think that's, you know, in my case anyway, that's really, you know, that's what happens. You know, you see things, but you get distracted by things. So I really wanted to just sit there for a little bit of time and observe. And the more I looked, you know, the more I started to see things. You know, I started to look at, you know, all these different things that, you know, the lazy modeler in myself, you know, wouldn't see or wouldn't model. And I find it really interesting to try and take things to the next level of detail. It's fun. I like going down the rabbit hole. And so I started to think about the things that were on this building that could be added to a model to make it, you know, hyper realistic. For example, all of the track on my layout, if I were to show it to you, is really neat and tidy. And reality is messy. You know, there is a lot of crap, you know, beside that nice clean ballast. And yes, this was taken in probably March, April, before it got green. So it would look a little bit different now with the weeds up. But even underneath those weeds, as you'll see in a few slides, you know, there's a lot of stuff. And I find that certainly when I model a scene, it tends to be very neat and tidy. And the world is never neat and tidy. Reality is often very chaotic. There's a lot happening, you know, on the side of this building. And the more I looked, the more I started to see, you know, vents and windows and air conditioning units and piping and, you know, the remnants of vines and patch jobs and all sorts of different things that sort of the old me, the lazy me, the, you know, the get a model built quickly me wouldn't necessarily add. Reality is also, I think, very imperfect. And I started to really look at the brickwork, and I noticed, you know, missing bricks and patch jobs and, you know, different colorations and things like that. Now, I really enjoyed sort of forcing myself to pause and take a look at this building and say, okay, you know, if I was going to model it, you know, and if I was going to go to the trouble of building it, you know, what are the things that I would need to add, you know, to take it up a notch, to make it a little bit more imperfect, a little bit more chaotic. You know, reality is sometimes an open window. You know, I have modeled buildings where every window is, you know, just nice and clean and closed, and that's not real. The more I look at, you know, even a single picture like this, you know, I see pipes sticking out and vents and, you know, all sorts of interesting things, you know, that could be modeled quite easily. It's just really taking the time to stop and think and observe, which is something that I find difficult to do, but I'm trying to train myself to do. You know, reality obviously is artsy, you know, graffiti, It might not be something that you like, and it might not be something that's in your time period, but certainly I model current day modern freight operations, and it's a reality. It's part of what I model. And sometimes reality can be really subtle. I was looking at the track and I zoomed it in and I saw this, little tiny, it looks like a 114 or 11 US or, some sort of little marking on the track. I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's a little tiny detail that I could add to the side of my track just to make it more realistic. Also there's a little stake standing here. No idea why or what it is. These are the types of things that as I started to look at the photographs, I noticed. And that, I think, is another point that I wanted to talk a little bit about, which is photography. Because I think it was Paul who mentioned, that sometimes it's hard to be artsy. And I agree, it is hard to be artsy. But what is not always hard, or what I find is not hard, is to copy. And if you look at photographs, you don't need any artistic ability whatsoever to stick a stake in the ground and write, 114, with a white Sharpie on the side of a piece of track. So I think that a lot of the creativity, in my mind, a lot of the creativity comes out of it when you're not creating art, but you're copying reality. And maybe that's one of the themes of this presentation. Take a photograph, stare at it, stare at it until your eyes hurt, and copy reality. And that will, in my mind, make a more creative, more interesting visual layout. And we'll talk about why I think that's important in a moment. So that's a little bit about what I got by sort of photographing the back of the building that I'm in, affectionately nicknamed Miniature Printerland by Gordy, who named the MiniPrints facility. And this photograph could very well someday provide the photographic reference for my artistic interpretation, of what the building looks like, in a former rail serve building. Okay, location number two. Location number two is that line that I mentioned to the west, 2 tracks on the outside, north and south for GO traffic, 2 tracks inside for Union Pearson traffic, I believe. That's the way it works. And there's some VIA on there. And this is taken from atop a pedestrian bridge, which if you come to visit MiniPrints is about a 5-10 minute walk from the facility. And it's a really old historic, there's only a couple in North America. It's been around for well over 100 years. It's a historic and fun bridge to check out. And the pictures I'm going to show you were taken from atop it. And I think this slide really says it all for me, because reality for me is certainly more than trains. And I get distracted by shiny objects. And there is no object that is more distracting than a train. And when I photograph trains, when I railfan trains, I'm completely focused on the train. And I guess another theme or another sort of tip of this presentation that I am constantly reminding myself is don't just look at the trains. I will come back from railfanning and I will have 100 photographs or videos of the locomotive. But there's so much more going on here. And I'm trying very hard to train myself, no pun intended, to look at more than the trains. So let's go back and let's take a look at this. What is there to look at here? Okay, well, there's something going on over here to the right. Some sort of, it looks like a switch machine maybe. There's something going on over here to the left, something down there. So let's take a look at that. What are the types of things, in this picture, staring at it, standing up on that bridge for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, just observing, that can add a bit of reality. And certainly, reality is, I think, very random sometimes. There's just things that, I don't think I'd ever think of doing, like putting a pylon somewhere. That is a scenic element. Reality is definitely trackside. With track machines, the switch machines, heaters, there's so much, so much to model when it comes to track. And these are the types of things, that I enjoy adding to my scenes. And certainly I enjoy making, as a mini print. So, reality is definitely trackside. Reality, certainly in Toronto, certainly, by a rail line, certainly, in the summer, is construction. I don't know what this is, whether these are weed blankets or, why they're there, but this is a wonderfully chaotic, interesting scene. You start to look at the dumpsters and the sheds, and there's an air conditioning unit on, that silver building. Of course, graffiti, that's a given, but what are all the other little elements here? Reality is animals. I mean, I think it was, I forget who said it, maybe Gordy or someone said, that there are birds all around, but we never put them on our layouts. Reality is animals, and birds are found everywhere in the real world and very rarely on our layout. And you can actually model a pigeon on a track because there is a prototype for everything. Reality is, and I was trying to figure out, what is this? What is sitting, between the tracks? And you find the weirdest things, trackside, all sorts of crazy things, clothes, garbage. Reality is a lot messier than I think we make it out to be on our model railroad layouts. And sometimes reality is hidden. Sometimes, you have to literally go deep into the weeds. And I loved this. I loved finding these things because on my layout, if I were to, model these things, I'd probably put them in neat, orderly little places like, side of a road or, something like that. But often you find unexpected things in unexpected places. And I'm sharing all of this because I enjoyed looking at something and really looking and observing it. And I also enjoyed coming up with ideas that, are things that I hopefully will be able to incorporate into my layout that will just give it that extra little dimension. Sometimes reality is cool. Sometimes, you are greater than equal to everything. And sometimes it looks like everything is greater than equal to you. So the third location, and I guess the final location for this sort of, I'll call it the inspiration part of the layout, is a rail yard, the Lambden rail yard that's located just in the junction. Used to be the largest CPR rail yard in Toronto until 1964 when they moved everything up to Agincourt. And I was way off in the distance and I saw, well, I think the first thing that attracted me to this picture when I wasn't looking at the trains were the seagulls, because MiniPrints make seagulls. They're very popular. And I'm like, oh, good, prototypical seagulls. This is excellent. Now we can create puddles in our yards and put seagulls in them. And then I got a little bit closer and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on down there. And I've got, I was using a decent zoom lens on a camera. So I started zooming in and saying, okay, maybe I should sort of move myself down to that area and see what's going on down there. And there are the seagulls in the puddle, and I zoomed in more and I'm like, okay, I gotta drive down and peek over the fence and see if I can see what's going on down there. And I got here, and here is my third and final example of reality is. And, there are the pylons, which seem to be everywhere in virtually every scene I photograph right now. And I thought, okay, let's take a look at this picture and see what I see. And what do I see? All sorts of things. So, reality is definitely rusty. And MiniPrints offers tie plates, and a pile of tie plates by the side of my track is mandatory, as is rusted rail, as is joint bars, all the stuff that, that you find in the real world are the things that I want to add to the side of my layout. Reality is definitely a lot dirtier than I think most layouts are. Reality is absolute rubbish everywhere I look. Certainly, in current day, reality is sometimes treasure. And as I was peeking over the fence with my zoom lens, I saw this fantastic old switch stand just lying off to the right of the picture there. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. That would be a really fascinating detail. Just, rust up a switch stand and, break it down and, put it beside some, these wooden boxes wouldn't be hard to build. You fill them up with some rusted bits and put them by the side of a layout. Adds another dimension of reality and a little bit of fun to a scene. And sometimes, reality is unexpected. I was sort of walking the fence line and I saw this old sign. I don't know what that is a whistle sign, or someone will know what 2 diamonds on a sign is, just lying by the side of the tracks. And then this is a really interesting detail, the underground fiber optic cable between here and the tracks. So a little warning sign. So these are some of the things that were really interesting to me. And I see there's a comment from Ralph. It says the best inspiration is prototype photos, and not just for weathering, but for more reality. And thank you, Ralph, because that's, if I'm going to sum up, this presentation, that's what I'm advocating for, is go out, take some pictures, stare at reality, and see what are the little bits that you can incorporate in. And then the question, I guess, really becomes why. Why do it? Reality is also A-okay. And I love this because as I was photographing it, I'm like looking at, I'm so busy looking at all the little details that I actually forgot to look at the rail car, which is what I would usually look at first. And then I realized that it was staring me right in the face, that everything is A-okay, and a really great little piece of turkey graffiti. So why bother? Why bother go down the rabbit hole? What's the point? Sure, you can go out and take pictures, and sure, it's kind of fun to, to stare at reality. But why would you weather up a switch stand and put it by the side of your tracks? And this is something that fascinates me. And I asked this of some of the modelers on my Facebook page a while ago. And what came up was a very interesting discussion of some of the reasons why modelers go down the rabbit hole and super detail their scenes. And I sort of was able to synthesize it into a number of themes, which I'd like to share with you and advocate as to why, it is a good idea, or why some people do enjoy doing this. And I will accompany it with photographs from MiniPrints customers of their model railroads and some of the things that they've done, as well as read you some quotes that came in as part of that conversation. So the themes of why you might want to super detail a scene: it tells a story. That story then draws you in. It can help to set your layout in a very specific place or time. Doing that makes your layout more believable and real. It creates a connection with the viewer. It lets your imagination and creativity run wild. Challenges you as a modeler and your skill. And I think for me anyway, most importantly, makes it fun. So let's take a look at each one of these. Tells a story. So Tim Adams wrote to me and said, it's not scenes for me, but stories. Signs on buildings and elsewhere are like credits in a movie, and details, figures, animals, and other things tell stories, and depict themes. And look at this wonderful story right here. And all these photographs were sent to me and are credited. You know, there's definitely a story there with, you know, the crew of 8004 has found an obstruction on the tracks that they now have to deal with. I mean, that's a beautiful little story. If I saw that, you know, on a layout, it's a showstopper. You know, John Sharp says that scenes like this of, I guess, the otters who are about to sneak up and steal the fisherman's catch. John says it helps tell a story of what you're trying to show. It also makes it more believable. The more details there are, the better it shows. Also, it's fun making little scenes and getting people to try and find it. You know, like an eagle going after a snake or these otters. It's a wonderful little cabin by Bill. You know, these are the types of things that I think you really draw you in. You know, John Grant commented to me that it's like a painting. You know, you add some light blue to a canvas and that's it. Light blue on a canvas. But then you add some tan, some brown, some green, some yellow, orange and red. Now what you have is someone looking past the tree watching the sunset into the ocean. The details are the things that finish the painting and the story. Now, instead of just looking at a building and walking by, you stop and look at it and it draws you into the picture. This is a little scene that Ray created. And Ray said, what draws people, not model railroaders, but people into a scene is the inclusion of figures and critters. Ray added, we can admire the craftsmanship of a well-detailed alleyway, but what draws you in is the figures, a couple making out, a drug deal, a cop making an arrest, somebody putting out the trash, dogs or cats or pigeons in the trash. As the others have noted, these figures tell a story and draws us into the scene as we try to figure out what that story is. A layout without figures and animals is sterile. The human, animal, avian element is essential to a well-preserved model railroad. Well-presented, I'm sorry, model railroad. John, and forgive me if you're on and I pronounce your name wrong, but I'll say John Kanakos says, we try to make our layouts as realistic as possible so we get immersed in our own little world. Secondly, this creates points with our visitors and amazes little ones. And Bruce Leckie commented and said, I use the details to create a mini scene. There are many of these mini scenes scattered over the layout. The eye travels from scene to scene and is pulled into the scene and the details. That creates an impression of the layout being larger than it is and focus the viewer to linger and savor. I love that word, savor. So adding these little details and super details will set your layout in a specific place and time. It'll anchor it. And Ricky Keel said, setting a believable and plausible scene and story. For example, I have a module based on an agricultural co-op town in the Midwest. My structures vary from old to new to even abandoned. Adding all the supporting actors really sells the idea, including birds eating spilled grain around the elevator. You know that you've succeeded when someone absolutely knows where the location is, even if it's either a generic location or a conglomerate of prototype-based scenes. And Joe LaRoche commented that a well-detailed scene often makes the viewer visitor recognize or believe a recognized area and often brings personal memories. We'll come back to that, to the viewer. Many times you have to take a second or third look to fully see what a scene tells you. All right, so these all sort of, you get a sense, you know, where you are by some of these details. And these things, I think, make the layout more believable, more real. Ken Bergen shared that if there's no smaller details, it's as if I'm just playing trains. If I have bothered to add details, I'm actually modeling a slice of reality. And I've got to say, this picture from Lloyd is one of my all-time favorite pictures. This was a little diorama he was building, and the arrows relate to where he's added MiniPrints. I think there's a woodpecker and a a rabbit and an eagle and I'm not sure, maybe a deer. But I mean, look at the chaos here. I mean, this to me is a little slice of reality because there's so much going on. You know, Chris Gagin says it helps tell the story of a scene. The extra scenic details are what helps the story come to life, adding realism and believability beyond miniature trains riding around in circles. And this is one of my favorite photographs. You know, just an old abandoned caboose with squirrels on top. Bob Miner said, as many of the people said before me, details, people, animals make a scene come alive. Even if for a brief moment, as a viewer scans through a scene while watching the train, they see the details whether they realize it or not. It makes it more believable, more real. It also tells a story and adds humor to a layout. On my layout, if you look closely and think about some of the scenes, you may see a scene reminiscent from the movie Cool Hand Luke and Smokey and the Bandit. You might also see the ever-elusive Bigfoot deep in the woods. And Randall Pratt commented, detailing a scene to bring it to life and help the viewer to be more immersed in what's going on. They can be this can be the difference between, oh, okay, nice layout, and, ooh, cool, look at the ... And why? You know, why do all this? Because at the end of the day, yes, there's operations, but we're really trying to create a connection with the viewer. And as John Alaniva says, it adds life to the scene. Adding subtle details that sometimes aren't visible to the eye come alive when photographed. It causes the viewer to pause and observe the scene in a different light. And it's fun to watch people discover those details, the details that you know are there, but that you didn't make a big deal about. And adding those details, and I love this quote. This is, I think, one of the things that I really identify with. John says, adding those details is what separates us from the Christmas tree loop crowd. You know, look at everything going on here. The deer in the bushes, the dog, this is a wonderful little scene from Susan. You know, or someone trackside. I wonder how much metal they're going to find trackside. Certainly, I would think quite a bit. You know, a lobster or a crab fisherman, you know, with the actual little crabs, you know, in the boxes. This is HO scale. Can you imagine how small that is? You know, these things are the things that let your imagination and creativity run loose. You know, it's just fun. You know, it's just fun to model things like this. You know, the MiniPrints, CSI, and skeletons. You know, birds in the graveyard. You know, love this beautiful scene of the Bigfoot. Yeah. You know, these are an HO scale scene with O scale lobsters, and I'm like, well, you model HO. Why do you want O scale? And it's because they went up on the actual sign. You know, this is the type of stuff that, you know, challenges your skill. I mean, Chris Ward says, much like when you draw a picture, there are levels of details and depth that you can put into the picture. You know, you can draw stick man or 2D or 3D. You can add shading, you can add colors, layers, highlights. Minifigures are just another level that you add to the, quote, artwork we create. Sure, you can add trees and grass, but what if a deer was grazing in the grass? Adding your figures adds another level to making our own masterpiece. And Dan Pugat says, super detailing is what makes it believable. I personally spend more money on detail parts than I do on structures and trains. I like to look at a layout or diorama as though I was looking through the camera lens. I used to be in urban photography and spent most of my time photographing alleyways and staircases, and you always see pigeons, newspapers, rats, etc. So there we go, right back to, you know, photograph reality and then duplicate it. And he says, I think there are different kinds of modelers out there. Those who like to watch your trains go around, those who could care less about what it looks like as long as they're having fun doing operations, and those who want everything to look like it belongs in a museum. And I'm sure there are many other kinds of modelers out there too, but that's just some examples. And then I'll conclude sort of this portion of why we do it with, I think, the one that resonated the most with me is it really makes it fun. And Jared Chico says, on our club layout, we have a game for kids of all ages to play. Some of the items are very small. Some are to make you laugh, such as penguins walking through the desert. And I remember I was at, I think it was maybe the York Modelers layout, where they had a submarine periscope coming up through a pond. So that's fun. Eric Block said, I believe little details can bring your layout to life. It gives more drama, especially humor. And when you have visitors, they always like to find something and see and talk about it for a long time. And I think from the point of view of humor, I'll just conclude with Poor Frank. And I'm sure most of you have seen Poor Frank. But if you haven't seen Poor Frank was a creation, or is a creation, of Dustin Pendergast, a very talented modeler out on Vancouver Island. And he was an early MiniPrints customer. And all of my animals started tormenting this model railroader named Frank. And I think to date, Poor Frank has been attacked, maligned, abused, and generally tormented by virtually every MiniPrints critter that has ever been created, including the Headless Horseman. And Poor Frank is really, if you haven't checked it out, besides being some really good modeling, it's worth seeing because it's funny. It's just gives me a giggle anyway. Since I went out and sort of asked these questions of, why would you bother to try and recreate, a super detailed scene on your layout? There have been two very interesting additions to this list where people have said, well, one of the things that I like to do with scenes is recreate memories of a time and place. When I was a kid and I went down to the fishing hole, or, where I grew up, or, something along those lines. And then another point that was brought up is that sometimes you create a scene on your layout specifically to honor someone, in memory of. So I thought those were two very interesting additional reasons to add to the list of why we go down the rabbit hole. So in conclusion, and I'll just sort of end a little bit here of my presentation with the fact that the reason that I'm so interested in this is that a large part of my day is spent coming up with ideas of the types of little details that you would add to your layout for these reasons. So when I go trackside and when I analyze all of these things, and when I take photographs and look at them, I'm looking at them both from the perspective of trying to train myself to be a better modeler by looking at the details, but also to see what I can add to my website. What are the little details that that might be missing in the market that will be sort of fun to add. If people are interested in MiniPrints, NMRA members always get 15% off at miniprints.com. I'm part of the NMRA partnership program. So I'll just say that if that's something that you don't know about, I find that it's actually an often forgotten or misused or ignored part of membership of the NMRA, is that if you log in and you look for the partnerships, nmra.org/partnerships, and you log in with your NMRA member, there are a lot of great companies out there that will offer you discounts. You can more than pay for your membership just with the discounts. And we offer 15% off with the code that you'll find when you log on. If you are not an NMRA member, well, number one, you should join. But number two, I'm running a sale this weekend for 15% off all objects. And the way you find out about that, and the way you find out about anything in the world of MiniPrints, including the way that you would contact me if there's something that you have found that you think would be a good MiniPrint, are either on our MiniPrints Facebook page, which you can see here. It's just Facebook and then MiniPrints 3D, or the Instagram page. And we've recently also started a YouTube page, which you can find all the links, from all these different things. So that's sort of my little sort of slice of reality is. I hope this was interesting and enjoyable. You can reach me at bernard@miniprints.com if you want to chat, suggest, comment, etc. And I will say thank you. And I'm certainly interested in everyone's thoughts and happy to answer any questions in the last 10 minutes.
That was great, Bernard. That's very thought-provoking. A couple of comments. You already saw the one from Ralph about best inspiration as prototype photos. Then Wolf says, great lesson and observation, thanks. And Tom writes, really like your presentation, we'll be in touch.
Oh, excellent.
So I had a question for you. How much of the detail do you think is era dependent? I think in terms of like railroads in the 50s still maintain their buildings pretty well.
Sure.
If they were using them. Whereas we tend to model things sometimes overly decrepit because it looks romantic in a way.
Sure. Yeah.
So how much do you think it depends on what era you're modeling?
Well, I mean, certainly, I'm a current day modeler, so it's quite easy for me to get inspiration by photographing, rubbish by the tracks and things like that. However, I would argue that if we did a, Back to the Future, took the DeLorean, back 50 years and walked around with our digital cameras and started photographing things, we would still find little details. I don't know what they would be, whether they would be a Coke bottle or, there would be different details that I'm sure we could model. Certainly, one of the reasons that I got into the animals first is that those don't change. There will always be and have always been, pigeons on top of buildings eating spilled grain or, on the tracks. And certainly things like, I think my best-selling animal of all time is the Canada goose, which you see behind me, because they are ubiquitous. I mean, whether it's Minnesota or Montreal, whether it's 1950 or 2022, those are scenic elements, so as to speak, that transcend. Definitely a challenge, but I'll bet you, I mean, Paul was talking about some of the historic photographs. And it just comes down, in my mind, to observation. I bet you, that if we went through some old historic photographs from the public library, we'd start to analyze things. I mean, I remember, and if I went back actually to the photograph of the building that I had from 1913, and actually I will, if that's okay, if you give me 1 second, I'm just going to go back to that photograph very quickly. Let me see if I can, because even that photograph, which is well over 100 years old, I started staring at it and I found things. I found things that, I never would have imagined, obvious things such as, here, let me see if I can fire that up. Here we go. Do you still see that on screen?
Yep.
Okay. So, these pipes, they're obviously putting in sewer mains. Here is the Grand Trunk boxcar I talked about. Here is a horse and buggy. Here it looks like a Model T. This window up here, I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, probably
yes,
not.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Oh, okay, good. The window up here, I bought these pictures off of the Toronto Archives. So I got, a really very high resolution version. You can actually see a desk and a lamp in this window. There's something sort of hanging off the building here, some sort of wooden something. So I still think that, there's still an opportunity. There's something here. I can't quite make it out, but there's still an opportunity in any era, any photograph, to go through and find some elements, I think, that will allow you to kick it up a notch.
Okay, there's a couple of other comments that came in. Someone's looking for barbecues and mowers to put in front of a Lowe's structure.
I have them.
Oh, very good.
I have Weber barbecues, like the Kettle Weber. I've got gas barbecues. I've got, multiple barbecues, and I've got someone pushing a lawnmower, and I've got a riding lawnmower. So, these are exactly the fun things, the fun things that sort of create that.
Another comment, love this presentation, making a story in particular. And then Ralph says, Bernard, Back to the Future, tune into my presentation. It's sort of a continuation in observation and letting your imagination run wild.
Oh, excellent. I see. I love clinics where there's a synchronicity, and everything one sort of builds on everyone else. So I guess just as Paul led into my presentation with the trackside photographer, I've now led into Ralph's presentation. So this is great.
Yeah.
And I have to say thank you again, that it's really an honor and a lot of fun to be part of this.
Well, thank you. I think I've heard you speak three times at least, and it's always different. It's always interesting.
Well, and I do apologize if people have heard the beaver story over 100 times. It's it is the evolution, the creation story, the creation myth of MiniPrints. But I'm always trying to evolve and change it up. And to that point, I'm really interested in this sort of taking this presentation of why we super detail scenes, and adding to that. So if people have other thoughts, comments, or scenes that they'd like to share around, the why we do what we do topic, please be in touch. It's an area that I'd like to go deeper into.
Okay. Yeah, I think Ralph's going to take us to a barn where he finds something interesting.
Oh, yeah. All right.
So that'll be later this afternoon. So
excellent.
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you very much on behalf of everybody in the audience. I can't clap audibly, but I'm sure they are in their heads. So thank you very much, Bernard. And thanks for sponsoring us too.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Thank you.